Jake Reynolds wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a black streak of fuel oil on his skin. His calloused fingers gripped a wrench as he tightened the last bolt on the engine of the old Chevy, which had been on a lift for 3 days at Buck's Auto. The clock above the workbench showed 6:47 p.m. The shift was taking longer than usual because old Buck, the owner, decided to leave early today, leaving Jake to deal with the capricious carburetor. "That's it, handsome. Now you won't stall at a traffic light," Jake muttered, patting the hood of the car as if she could hear him. He tossed the wrench onto the workbench, where there were already rusty bolts, a couple of screwdrivers, and an empty can of Bud Light that he had finished an hour ago. The workshop smelled of gasoline, iron, and dust, a smell he had loved since childhood. "Hey, Jake, are you alive there?" Rick, his workshop partner, shouted, leaning out of the utility room. His red beard stuck out from under a ranger's cap, and he held a bag of chips in his hands. "Alive than anyone alive," Jake responded, pulling his sweat-soaked t-shirt over his head. Beneath it was a tattoo of an eagle on his left shoulder, a memory of Iraq, where he had spent 2 years in a maintenance company fixing Humvees under the scorching sun. "You'd rather help than eat your Doritos." "Come on, hero of the day," Rick chuckled, stuffing the chips into his mouth. "The client will pick you up tomorrow morning, so relax. Go home, Ashley. I'm guessing you're tired of waiting." Jake just snorted, pulling on an old plaid shirt that was hanging on a hook. "Ashley is tired of waiting. It would be a miracle." He nodded to Rick, slammed the workshop door, and went outside. The sun was already setting below the horizon, turning the sky over Texas crimson. His Ford F-150 pickup, shabby but faithful, stood in the parking lot, its dusty body glistening. Jake climbed inside, started the engine, and pulled out onto the main road of the town. 3 streets, a couple of gas stations, and the rusty nail bar, where locals drank away their paychecks. The journey home took 15 minutes. He lived in a small house on the outskirts, 1 story, with peeling paint and a creaky veranda. The garage is attached to the side, and that's where Jake headed as soon as he parked the pickup. The door to the house slammed before he could turn off the engine. "Have you spent the whole day in this hole again?" Ashley's voice cut the air like a knife through glass. She stood on the threshold, arms crossed over her chest, wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and in her hands was the ever-present phone. "Hello to you too." Jake got out of the car, rubbing his palms. The fuel oil had ingrained itself into his skin, and he knew it was pissing Ashley off. "Yes, I did. This is the job." "Work," she snorted, not looking up from the screen. "And I've been sitting here like a fool all day." "I could have at least called." "I called at lunch." Jake stepped towards the garage, opening the side door. "You didn't answer the phone." "Because I was busy." Ashley raised her voice, but remained where she was. "I have a life too, you know." Jake didn't answer. He entered the garage, flicked the switch, and a dim light illuminated his corner of freedom. In the center stood a 1969 Ford Mustang GT Black with a scuffed hood, but still a beauty. Jake ran his hand along the wing, feeling the coldness of the metal. It was his pride, his project. 5 years ago, he bought this junk for pennies at a junkyard, and since then he has been fixing it on weekends, putting his soul and every extra $100 into it. "Hey, can you hear me at all?" Ashley appeared in the garage door with her hands on her hips. "Or are you going to tinker with this piece of hardware again?" "Yes, I hear you." Jake pulled out an old tape recorder from under the workbench and pressed play. Creedence Clearwater Revival guitars hummed through the cramped room. "Just tired, Ash. Give me half an hour, will you?" "Half an hour," she grimaced, as if she had swallowed a lemon. "You hang around here every evening." "Am I furniture in this house?" "You're not furniture." Jake opened the toolbox, taking out a screwdriver. "But I'm not a robot either. I need to relax." "Relax." Ashley stepped closer, her voice becoming sharper. "How can I relax, huh? I'm sitting, waiting for you, while you treat this car like a lover." Jake froze, clutching the screwdriver. He turned slowly, looking at her. Ashley was pretty even now, with tired eyes and no makeup, She still had something of the girl he chased 10 years ago. But that tone, those words, they cut deeper than he wanted to admit. If you feel that bad, tell me straight. He put down the screwdriver, wiping his hands on a rag. What do you want, Ash? I want you to be at home, not in this barn. She waved her hand at the garage. I want us to live like normal people and not like those losers from the trailer park. Losers? Jake narrowed his eyes, taking a step towards her. I'm working, Ash. Every day. Is this a loser? What's the point? She pointed a finger at his chest. Where is your money, Jake? Where is the vacation I dream of? Where is there anything besides this garage and your stinking hands? He recoiled as if she had hit him. The fuel oil suddenly began to feel like a brand on my fingers. He looked at her, trying to find words, but only one thing was buzzing in his head. When did everything go wrong? I'm trying, he finally managed. For us. For us? Ashley laughed, but there was no joy in the laughter. You are trying for yourself. And I'm here alone, like a fool. She turned and walked into the house, slamming the door so hard the garage light flickered. Jake stood there for a second, then sat down on an old chair by the workbench. Proud Mary was still playing, but now it sounded like a mockery. He grabbed a can of beer from the refrigerator in the corner, opened it in one motion, and took a sip. The cold taste sobered me up a bit. What's going on with her? He muttered, looking at the Mustang. The car was silent, but in its black lines he saw more understanding than in his wife's eyes. He stood up, went to the hood, and opened it. The engine was shining. He had just changed the spark plugs and adjusted the carburetor last week. This was his outlet. In the army, he repaired equipment under fire, at home under Ashley's screams. Maybe she's right. Maybe he's really stuck. Jake! Ashley's voice came from the house again. Are you going to dinner, or should I eat this pizza alone? I'm coming, he shouted, but did not move. Pizza. Pizza again. She ordered it for the third time in a week because I don't have the energy to cook. He sighed, closed the hood, and turned off the tape recorder. The silence hit my ears. The house was warm, but it smelled not of comfort, but of stale smoke from her cigarettes. Ashley was sitting at the kitchen table with a box of pepperoni and a glass of cola in front of her. The phone was lying next to her. The screen was glowing. She was scrolling through something without even looking at it. Sit down, she muttered, tearing off a piece of pizza. Jake sat down opposite him, took a piece, but didn't eat it. He looked at her, trying to remember the last time they had a normal conversation. A year ago, 2. How was your day? He asked, just to break the silence. As usual, she shrugged, without looking up. I stood behind the cash register, listening to Fat Marge from the grocery store complaining about her dog. And you? We cleaned the Chevy. He took a bite of pizza and chewed. Rick almost broke the lift again. Rick, she chuckled. Has this clown quit yet? He's a normal guy, Jake shrugged. He's just lazy sometimes. So are you, she said so casually that he almost choked. What did you say? He put the pizza down, looking into her eyes. Nothing, Ashley waved it off, turning back to her phone. Come on, eat. He wanted to answer, but changed his mind. Instead, he stood up, grabbed another beer from the refrigerator, and returned to the table. They ate in silence, only the sound of her fingers on the screen breaking the silence. Jake looked at her and thought, Who have you become, Ash? After dinner, she went into the living room and turned on some TV series. Jake washed the dishes, something he always did because Ashley didn't like to deal with dishes. Then he returned to the garage. He turned the tape recorder back on, Bad Moon Rising, booming through the air. Jake took a screwdriver and began to disassemble the panel just to keep his hands busy. But my thoughts revolved around Ashley. Her words, her look, her phone. Something was wrong, and he felt it. Maybe she's just tired. Or is it just him? The clock struck 9. He finished with the panel, turned off the light, and went into the house. Ashley was already asleep on the couch. The TV was blaring commercials. Jake turned it off, covered her with a blanket, and stood looking at her. He went into the living room and lay down on the sofa without undressing. Sleep did not come. Instead, questions swirled in his head. What will happen tomorrow? And why did he suddenly feel that he was losing not only her, but also himself? Ashley Reynolds leaned against the No. 7 cash register counter, lazily moving a pack of gum from place to place. The clock showed 4:15 p.m. Saturday dragged on like an old truck through the mud. The line at Walmart had thinned, and she could finally catch her breath. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, and yesterday's argument with Jake was spinning in her head. "Do you even notice that I'm alive?" Her words echoed in her thoughts, but his answer, "I'm trying," only infuriated her more. He's trying. For whom? "Ashley, don't fall asleep there." Marge shouted from the nearby counter where she was laying out cans of tuna. Her voice was like a steam locomotive whistle, loud and annoying. "I'm not sleeping." Ashley threw the chewing gum into place and straightened up. "Just resting for a second." "You'll rest at home," Marge chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. "And then Kim complained again that you were punching slowly." "Let her try to hang around here all day," Ashley muttered, but so that Marge wouldn't hear. She hated these jokes, but she didn't want to argue. Her gaze fell on the phone under the counter. Instagram was waiting there, her little escape from this hole. And then the store door rang. Ashley looked up and froze. A man entered the aisle, tall, in a dark gray suit, who fit like a glove. A Rolex flashed on his wrist, and in his hands he held a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, but this only added to his charm. Ashley swallowed. Such types rarely appeared in their town. Usually there were rednecks in caps and farmers with dirty boots. He walked up to her cash register, placed the bottle on the ribbon, and smiled. Not like winking men with beer, but easily, confidently. Ashley suddenly realized that her smile was still on her face, an on-duty, forced smile. "Hello," he said, looking into her eyes. The voice was low, with a slight hoarseness. "This is all." "Hello," she nodded, breaking through her temples. "Do you need the package?" "No need," he shook his head, taking out his wallet. "I can handle it." Ashley glanced at his hands, well-groomed, without calluses, unlike Jake's. The screen showed $32.99. She opened her mouth to name the amount, but he beat her to it. "You deserve better than to stand here," he said, holding out a credit card. His gaze lingered on her a little longer than necessary. Ashley froze, her fingers hovering over the scanner. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked away. "What?" she asked again, as if she hadn't heard. "I said, you deserve better," he smiled wider, inserting the card into the terminal. Such a pretty girl shouldn't spend her life behind the cash register. "Well, thank you," she snorted, but something sank inside. Nobody called her that. How long? 3 years? Work is work. Maybe so. He pulled out a card, took the whiskey, and took a business card out of his pocket. "But if you want something else, call." He placed his business card on the counter, white, with gold letters, "Kyle Morgan, attorney." Ashley looked at her, then at him. He winked, turned around, and left, leaving behind a light trail of cologne, expensive, not like the cheap stuff that was sold right there in the cosmetics department. "Hey, who was that?" Kim leaned out from behind the next cash register, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Yes, some guy," Ashley shrugged, but her fingers had already grabbed the business card and put it in her jeans pocket. "I bought whiskey and left." "Some guy in a suit?" Kim chuckled. "This is not Bobby with his beer belly." "What did he say?" "Nothing special." Ashley turned away, pushing the goods to the next buyer. "Just chatting." "Yeah, he was chatting." Kim laughed. "Your cheeks are red, friend." "I haven't seen this for a long time." "Fuck off." Ashley glanced at her, but the corners of her lips twitched. She didn't want to admit that Kyle's words hurt her. "You deserve better." She repeated this to herself for the rest of her shift, until the line began to pile up again. By 6 p.m., she was exhausted. My legs were buzzing, my back was aching, and this man in a suit was spinning in my head. She said goodbye to Kim, shouting, "See you tomorrow," and went out into the parking lot. Her old Honda Civic was waiting at the post, beaten by life no less than she was. Ashley got behind the wheel, but instead of driving home, she took the business card out of her pocket. Kyle Morgan. Phone number, office address in the city center. She turned the card over in her hands, then put it back. Why do I need this? She thought, but her heart was beating a little faster. Jake was already home, his pickup truck was parked at the porch, and music was coming from the garage. Ashley entered the house, threw her bag on the sofa, and shouted, "I'm home." "Yeah, I heard it," he responded from the garage. The voice sounded muffled, as if it was under the hood. Ashley rolled her eyes, but didn't argue today. She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out a can of Coke. The cold metal burned my fingers pleasantly. She took a sip, looking out the window. Jake was tinkering with his Mustang as always. Usually this would infuriate her, but now she just stood there and watched. "Are you going to eat?" she shouted a minute later. "Yes, I'll finish now." He crawled out from under the car, wiping his hands with a rag. He was wearing the same checkered shirt as in the morning, only now it was all stained with fuel oil. Ashley nodded, taking the pizza out of the freezer. She stuck it in the microwave while Jake stomped into the house. He walked in, slamming the door, and plopped down at the table. "Why are you so quiet?" He squinted, putting the jar on the table. "Usually you start sawing right away." "I'm not starting to see," she glanced at him, "but without the usual fire. I'm just tired." "Well, rest then," he shrugged, tearing off a piece of pizza as soon as the microwave beeped. "I'll go to the garage. I need to finish the panel." "Go," Ashley nodded, taking a piece for herself. She didn't even bother with his words. Jake raised his eyebrows in surprise, but remained silent. They ate in near silence, except for the TV blaring in the living room, some old Western that Ashley had turned on in the background. She was chewing pizza, but her thoughts were somewhere far away. "You deserve better." These words were spinning in my head like a broken record. She stole a glance at Jake, his hands, black from fuel oil, his tired face. 10 years ago, he was different, a veteran with sparkling eyes who promised her the whole world. Now what? Garage and pizza. "Are you sure you're okay?" Jake interrupted her thoughts, putting aside the empty jar. "You are silent, like you are not." "Yes, I'm fine." She waved it off, standing up. "Eat, I'll go take a shower." "Okay," he nodded, but looked after her until she disappeared into the corridor. Ashley closed the bathroom door, turned on the water, and stood under the hot streams. Steam filled the room. Something moved inside, small, but sharp, like a spark. Kyle's voice echoed in my head. "You deserve better." Maybe he's right. The next day, Ashley was back at work, another Groundhog Day. Her fingers with peeling red varnish flickered over the scanner buttons, and her lips stretched into a routine smile, which she had rehearsed over 3 years of work. The clock above the counter showed 10:32 a.m. There was still an hour and a half before the break, and my feet were already aching from the cheap sneakers I bought right there at the crossroads. "Do you need the package?" she asked another customer, a fat woman in a colorful dress who dumped a mountain of canned food onto the belt. "Come on, honey," the aunt puffed, rummaging in her wallet. "You can't carry these cans in your hands." Ashley nodded, stuffing the cans into a plastic bag with the store's logo on it. "Darling." She hated that word. Everyone threw it around, from old people to teenagers, as if she were part of the scenery. She finished with a check, handed it to her aunt, and immediately moved on to the next guy in a baseball cap who had only bought a pack of cigarettes and a can of Monster. "10.50, she said, without even looking him in the eye. "Here." The guy handed her a crumpled 20. Ashley counted out her change, threw it into the drawer, and waved her hand. "Next." The line moved, the voices merged into a hum, and she worked automatically. But everything was boiling inside. She's 34, and she's standing here like a schoolgirl at a part-time job, counting pennies for other people's lives. She glanced at the phone lying under the counter. The screen blinked a notification from Instagram. Ashley opened it furtively as the line froze for a second. On the screen is a photo of some blonde in a bikini on the beach in Miami with the caption, "Life is now." Ashley pursed her lips. Life, she thought. What do I have? Hey, did you fall asleep there? The buyer's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. A man with a beer belly stood in front of her, holding a case of Coors Light in his hands. No, I'm calling. She quickly put the phone away, putting on a smile. Plastic bag? No need, I'll tell you myself. The man winked, as if it was a compliment. Ashley rolled her eyes, but only mentally. When the line finally cleared, she exhaled and looked at the clock 11:45. Break. She grabbed her phone and bag and shouted into the back room. Marge, I'll be in 15 minutes. Go, go, don't be late, responded Marge, the fat lady from the grocery store, who was always complaining about her dog chewing the sofa. Ashley ran into the lounge, a cramped space with a worn sofa, a coffee machine, and the smell of rancid oil. She plopped down on the couch, opened Instagram, and started scrolling. Girls in Gucci dresses, guys on yachts, sunsets over the ocean. Her finger hovered over a photo of her childhood friend, Lisa, who now lived in Dallas. Lisa stood by the pool in an embrace with her businessman husband, caption, "Weekend in Paradise." Ashley swallowed the lump in her throat. "Paradise," she muttered, "and I'm here with canned food and beer for the rednecks." "Why are you muttering?" Kim, a partner from the next cash register, burst into the room. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she was holding coffee from the machine. "Yes," Ashley shrugged, not looking up from the screen. "I watch how people live." "Yeah, they live." Kim plopped down next to him, taking a sip of coffee. "These are all filters and show-offs. Real life is here, behind the cash register." "Maybe they have it." Ashley pointed at the phone. "What do I have?" "Jake with his garage and pizza 3 times a week." "Well, at least Jake is working," Kim chuckled. "My Bobby spends half the day lying on the couch and the other half at the bar." "It works," Ashley grimaced. "What's the point? We are stuck in this town like flies in tar. No money, no prospects." "Come on," Kim waved her hand. "Your guy is normal, you have a house. What more do you need?" "Normal," Ashley snorted, putting the phone down. "He spends more time with this car of his than with me. Yesterday, I was stuck in the garage again until 9. Guys," Kim laughed. "Give them a piece of hardware, and they are happy. Bobby is also always fixing his motorcycle, even though it hasn't been ridden for 6 months." "Exactly." Ashley stood up, stretching. "What am I? Am I sitting, waiting for him to play enough?" "Tell him," Kim shrugged. "Let him buy flowers or take him to the cinema." "Flowers," Ashley grinned. "He'd rather give me spark plugs for the engine." She left the break room, leaving Kim to finish her coffee. A new line was waiting for her at the checkout. It was Saturday. People were stocking up for the weekend. Ashley stood behind the scanner, but her thoughts revolved around Kim's words. Should I tell Jake? What will she say? "Stop fixing your stupid car and notice me." He just snorts and goes back to the garage. "Plastic bag?" she asked the next customer, but her voice was quieter than usual. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she was exhausted. The cues, Marge's whining about her dog, the smell of sweat from men with beer, all this pressed on me like a concrete slab. She went on break again, but now she just stood at the exit, looking at the parking lot. The cars came and went, and she thought, is this all? For the rest of my life? "Ashley, are you alive there?" Marge leaned out of the door. "Buyers are complaining that you're slow." "I'm coming." She waved her hand, but did not move. Her gaze fell on the phone. She opened Instagram again and scrolled to Lisa's photo. "Weekend in Paradise." Ashley clenched her fists. She wanted this. I wanted to break out. At home, the same evening awaited her as yesterday. Jake arrived at 6:50, covered in oil, threw his backpack at the door, and immediately went to the garage. Ashley sat in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while the pizza warmed up in the microwave. She quickly ate, grabbed the phone, and went into the living room, leaving it in the kitchen. Jake stood looking at the pizza, then took a beer from the refrigerator and walked out onto the porch. He sat down on an old chair, opened the can, and took a sip. The evening was warm, but it was cold inside. Something was changing, and he felt it. Yuokt sat on the couch, scrolling through Instagram. She found a photo of some couple in Mexico sunset, cocktails, smiles. Her fingers froze. I want that too, she thought. And at that moment, I remembered the business card in my jeans pocket. Kyle Morgan. She didn't know why she kept it. I didn't know yet. Ashley Reynolds sat on the couch with her arms wrapped around her knees as the TV blared another episode of Friends. It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday, her day off, and there was silence in the house. Jake had left for his shift at 7. She was scrolling through her phone, but Instagram was not encouraging today. The same beaches, the same smiles. Her gaze fell on the chest of drawers in the corner of the living room. There, under a stack of old t-shirts, was a business card. Kyle Morgan, lawyer. She swallowed, feeling her heart speed up slightly. Come on, nonsense, she muttered, leaning back on the sofa. But Kyle's words, you deserve better, have not left my head for the third day. Her fingers themselves reached towards the chest of drawers. She pulled out the business card and turned it over in her hands. Call? Don't call? Why at all? Ashley, why are you talking to yourself? She snorted, but did not remove the card. Instead, she opened the phone, entered the number into her contacts, and froze. My thumb hovered over the call button. Okay, I'll just ask what he meant. It's okay. She pressed call and put the phone to her ear. The beeps went on for a long time. 1, 2, 3. Ashley was about to quit when a deep voice answered. Kyle Morgan, I'm listening. Hi, she coughed, straightening up on the couch. This is Ashley. Well, from Walmart. You left me a business card. Ashley, a smile appeared in his voice. She heard it. Glad you called. How's the cutest cashier in Texas doing? Ha, okay, she chuckled, fiddling with the edge of the blanket. I decided to ask what you said about more. What do you think? He laughed, and Ashley imagined him sitting in his office, probably a leather chair, an expensive table. I'm serious. You look like someone who deserves better than to slap beer for rednecks. Maybe so, she shrugged, although he didn't see it. But I still don't see how to find this more. Let's start small, he lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret. Let's meet and talk. There is a restaurant outside of town, Blue Oak. Good wine, normal food. Is tomorrow at 7 okay? Ashley froze. Meeting? With this guy in a suit. She opened her mouth to refuse, but instead said, It will do. Just me. Well, it's just to talk, right? Of course, he laughed. Just talk. I'll pick you up if you want. No, I myself. She quickly shook her head. I have a car. Great, he paused for a second. Then see you tomorrow, Ashley. Don't change your mind. I won't change my mind, she smiled, without noticing it, and hung up the call. The phone fell on the sofa, and she stared at the ceiling. What am I doing? Flashed through my head, but warmth spread inside. It was not like with Jake, not a routine, but something new. Jake returned home at 6:45, as usual, smelling of fuel oil and looking tired. Ashley was sitting in the kitchen, warming up yesterday's pizza. She has already come up with a plan. I'm going to Linda's today, she said, not looking at him as the microwave hummed. She had a fight with her husband again. We need to support her. To Linda. Jake took off his shoes at the door, throwing his backpack on the floor. This is the one with 2 children. Yeah, Ashley nodded, trying to sound natural. I'll be back late, so don't wait up. Okay, he walked to the sink, washing his hands. Say hi to her. She's a normal woman. I'll pass it on. Ashley pulled out the pizza, placing the plate in front of him. She didn't even notice how her voice became a little higher, the first sign of a lie. Jake took the piece, but didn't say anything. Ashley twirled in front of the bedroom mirror. She pulled out a black dress from the closet, not new, but with a neckline that she liked. She let her hair down and painted her lips with red lipstick, which she hadn't worn since her sister's wedding 2 years ago. Just talk, she repeated to herself, but the mirror showed something else. Where are you going? Jake entered the bedroom, wiping his hands with a rag. He just returned and hasn't changed his clothes yet. To Linda, she glanced over her shoulder. In a dress? He squinted, but without suspicion, just in surprise. Well, yes, she shrugged, grabbing her purse. We'll drink wine and chat. I haven't been out for a long time. Oh, okay, he nodded, going into the kitchen. Have fun there. Ashley exhaled. He believed. Or did he not care? She didn't know which was worse. Blue Oak was a half-hour's drive away, a small wooden restaurant near the highway, with garlands on the veranda and a view of the field. Ashley parked her Civic next to a shiny black BMW and immediately knew it was Kyle's car. She came out, straightened her dress, and stepped towards the entrance. Kyle was already waiting at the table in the corner, a dark blue suit, his shirt unbuttoned at the top button, a glass of wine in his hands. He stood up when he saw her and smiled so hard that her knees buckled. Ashley, he extended his hand, but instead of shaking, he lightly squeezed her fingers. You look amazing. Thank you, she sat down, feeling her cheeks burn. You too. Nothing. Nothing? He laughed, sitting down opposite. Okay, I'll take it as a compliment. What will you drink? Wine, she nodded towards his glass. The same. Good choice, he waved to the waiter and ordered another glass and a bottle of Pinot Noir. How did you get there? Okay, she shrugged, looking around. The restaurant was cozy wooden walls, soft music, the smell of steaks from the kitchen. I haven't been here before. Then you're lucky, Kyle winked. The food is excellent, and the company, I hope, is even better. Ashley smiled as she accepted the glass from the waiter. The wine was warm, with a fruity aftertaste, not the same swill she drank with Jake from the supermarket. They clinked glasses, and she took a sip. So what did you mean? She asked, putting down her glass. About this, more? It's simple. Kyle leaned back in his chair, looking into her eyes. You are beautiful, smart, with a sparkle, and you live like in a cage. Isn't that right? Maybe so. She looked away, fiddling with her napkin. But I have a job, a husband, and a house. This is not a cell, this is life. This is not life, this is survival. He leaned closer. Have you ever been to Mexico? In Europe? Just for your own sake, and not for the sake of someone else? No, she shook her head, feeling a pang of envy. Jake and I mean, I don't have the money for this. Money is not a problem, Kyle smiled, as if he knew something that she didn't. The problem can be solved. I can show you another world, Ashley, if you want. She fell silent, looking at him. His words were like a magnet. They pulled, they promised, they frightened. The waiter brought flowers, a bouquet of red roses that Kyle had ordered in advance, and placed them between them. This is for you, he said, moving the vase. Just like that. Seriously. She laughed, but took one rose, inhaling the smell. Is this how you get to know all the cashiers? Only with those I like, he winked, and her heart trembled again. They chatted for 2 hours about his work. He defended some rich people in the courts, about her dreams. She once wanted to be a designer, about life. The wine flowed like a river, the food steak for him, chicken for her tasted better than anything she had eaten in years. Kyle jokes, talks about a trip to Italy, and promises to take her to the coast. Ashley laughed, forgetting about time. When the clock showed 10:30, she perked up. Oh, I have to go. She stood up, grabbing her purse. It's already late. It's a pity. Kyle stood up, accompanying her to the door. But this is just the beginning, right? Maybe, she smiled, feeling light in her head. Thank you for the evening. Thank you. He stepped closer, but didn't hug her, just touched her shoulder. Call me when you want to repeat. Ashley nodded and walked out to the car. The walk home flew by unnoticed. She hummed to the radio. Her cheeks were flushed. Her dress smelled of his cologne. When she entered the house at 11:15, Jake was sitting on the couch with a beer, watching the TV. How's Linda? He asked without looking up from the screen. Okay, Ashley threw her bag on the floor, trying not to look him in the eyes. We drank wine and chatted. Yeah, I see, he turned, squinting. You're all red. Was it fun? Yes, it's fun, she shrugged, going into the bedroom. I'm going to sleep. Jake watched her go. Her blush, her smell something was wrong. But he remained silent, taking another sip of beer. Ashley lay down in bed without undressing and closed her eyes. Kyle's voice echoed in my head. Another world. She wanted to go there, and it was scary. Jake Reynolds sat on the edge of the couch, looking at the TV, but didn't see anything. There was some stupid commercial for chips on the screen, people laughing merrily, having fun on the beach, but he didn't hear a word. Thoughts creaked in my head about Ashley's strange behavior, about how they hardly spoke anymore. I wanted to figure out what was happening to my wife. Through the silence in the living room, the rustling of paper was suddenly heard. It was a light, almost imperceptible sound. Jake turned his head to see Ashley's purse, which she had thrown away when she returned, had fallen off the table. The purse was half open, and some kind of receipt or check was sticking out of it. He stood up, came closer, and leaned over. I wanted to just put her things back, but my eye caught the logo Blue Oak. That same restaurant outside the city that people have been talking about lately. It's expensive and delicious. It has excellent wine. They take ladies there when they want to impress. Jake, Blue Oak? We've never been there, and we can't afford it, to be honest. When did she have time? He picked up the check and smoothed it out. The date on the paper was yesterday. The amount was such that Jake whistled. It looks like they left more there that evening than they usually spend on groceries in a week. Also ordering wine, steak, some fish, dessert. He read the waiter's name, Ryan, and the time was 21:30. But Ashley flashed through Jake's head. She said that she was staying with Linda. Linda is her friend, 2 children, a caring husband who is always drinking beer in the backyard. Where is the restaurant from? Noticing how his fingers were shaking, Jake carefully put the check back in his bag so that everything looked the same. The heart was beating heavily and inevitably, as if warning, "Be careful, Guy, something is wrong here." He sat down on the sofa, bowing his head. Jake, what the hell? But with whom then, and why did she lie? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of keys in the door. Ashley walked into the living room, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She saw his gaze tense, questioning, and grimaced with displeasure. Works. What is that face on your face, like you're under interrogation? Jake, I was just thinking. Works. Oh, I see. About your engines again. I hope you've already had dinner. I'm not hungry. She went to the kitchen, but he grabbed her elbow, trying not to make the movement rude just to attract attention. Jake, wait, Ash. Maybe we can talk? It seems to me that lately you've been kind of alien. Ashley pulled back her hand, irritation flashing in her eyes. Works. What are we going to talk about? What carburetor did you replace today, or what pads? That's all you're interested in, after all. Jake, what kind of nonsense? Am I not talking to you? Yes, I'm ready to listen. I just see that you're not walking around like yourself. Works. You don't walk like yourself. Did you even notice that I put on a new dress last week? Probably not. You're too busy with the Mustang. Do you know what it means to pay attention to your wife? He stepped closer, trying to take her hand, but she retreated. The tension grew, as if there was a stretched string between them. Jake, Ash, I can be inattentive, but not to the same extent. I'm worried. Do you see what's happening? We hardly communicate. You are unhappy all the time. If you need something, tell me. Maybe I'll at least figure out how to help. Ashley turned away, looking at the tile floor. Works. The problem is that it is no longer possible to help. I'm tired. I'm tired of this hole, of your eternal fuel oil. I need more than this life. Jake clenched his fists not to hit, just from powerlessness. Jake, do you want to leave? Move to another city, start something new. Let's discuss. But you don't talk to me, you keep everything to yourself. Ashley smiled bitterly. Works. Yes, even if we leave, then with what? With your mechanic's salary. I don't want to spend half my life saving for a vacation and then counting the pennies. I'm tired of all this, Jake, you know. He looked at her and did not recognize the girl who 10 years ago shouted to him, "I agree," at the city chapel, laughed at his jokes, and promised that everything would be cool with them. Of course, they were younger then, they believed in miracles, but now, Jake, look, I'm not Rockefeller, but I'm trying. I work overtime. If you wanted, we could somehow plan for the future. Together. Works. Plan. All you have to do is plan and turn the screws. And I need to live now. And you know, I'm tired of waiting for you to save up, make repairs, get ready for a new gearbox. I am a woman. I want to see the world, not these walls. She exhaled shakily, grabbed a can of cola from the refrigerator, and took a sip. Jake could see that she was shaking with emotion. He himself felt his veins trembling from fear and misunderstanding. Jake, did you visit Linda yesterday? He caught her gaze, and for a moment her eyes flashed, as if she were afraid. Then she turned away abruptly and pretended to be looking for something on the shelf. Works. Yes, we sat and chatted about feminine things. And what? Jake nodded slowly, as if confirming to himself that she was lying. Jake, it's clear. Okay, Ash, let's leave this conversation for now. If you want to talk, I'm ready. She didn't answer, just pursed her lips, and then slipped out of the kitchen and went into the bedroom. Jake was left alone. He heard her go into the bathroom and slam the door. He wanted to open the door, shout, "What the hell is going on?" Pull that ill-fated check out of his bag and demand an explanation. But something inside him stopped him, the fear that the answer would be worse than silence. He returned to the living room and sat on the sofa, staring at the same advertisement. Thoughts revolved around one thing. She's lying. Does she have someone? Or did she just run off with a friend to have fun? But why then is he hiding it? An hour later, Ashley came out of the bathroom in a robe, her hair damp. Without saying a word, she went into the bedroom and closed the door. When Jake looked in there at night to lie down next to her, she pretended to be asleep, turning to the wall. The morning turned out to be even colder. Ashley got up early, got dressed in silence, only muttering, "Works. My friend will give me a lift to Walmart. Today the shift starts at 8. Jake wanted to offer her a ride, but in response he received only a go-ahead. She left, slamming the door. He sighed heavily and scrolled through his phone. Several messages from Rick appeared on the screen, apparently something about work. Jake, my wife doesn't want to spend even a couple of minutes in the car with me. Great. It was gray and cloudy outside, as if even the weather sensed the tense situation. Jake drove across town to Buck's Auto, noticing that the traffic lights were still flashing yellow. He didn't usually arrive so early. There was only Buck's rusty truck parked in the parking lot, but the owner himself was nowhere to be seen. Rick. Oh, look who got there first. Admit it, what is the reason? Jake winced and turned around. Rick, red beard, ranger's cap, hot dog clutched in his teeth. Apparently, he decided to have breakfast on the go. Jake. Yes, I woke up at the crack of dawn. There is nothing to do at home. Rick. Is Ashley okay? She hasn't dropped by for a long time, and you're as gloomy as a hungover bear. Jake looked at him in such a way that Rick understood. It was better not to get into his soul. But Rick was his friend, and Jake, deep down, wanted to talk it out. Jake. Yes, we have. Some kind of attack. She's angry. I don't understand what's going on. He goes somewhere, lying that he's visiting his friends. In short, the devil will break his leg. Rick took a bite of his hot dog and nodded thoughtfully. Rick, maybe you can talk to her seriously. Tell me how you feel. I know that you are not a fan of frank conversations, but damn it, you have to. Otherwise, it will be too late later. Jake. I tried. She closes and just yells that I don't give a damn. Rick. Badly. Well, hang in there, brother. Maybe things will work out. Women sometimes do this, then exhale and return to normal. Jake shrugged his shoulders and pretended to agree, although in his heart he doubted that it would go away on its own. Some checks from an expensive restaurant didn't look like something that would pass. They went inside the workshop and got to work. They needed to replace the brakes on an old Dodge, which was already 30 years old. Jake tried to plunge into the usual rhythm, lift the car, unscrew the bolts, remove the pads. But his thoughts returned to Ashley. By lunchtime, he looked up and realized that the phone was ringing in the break room. Usually no one called there except on official business. He put the instrument down, wiped his hands with a rag, and went to pick up the phone. Jake. Buck's Auto. How can we help? Linda. Hello, this is Linda. Sorry to bother you. It's just that I haven't seen Ashley for a long time, and I can't get through to her. I wanted to know if she was okay. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Linda, why is she calling? He didn't expect this. Jake, haven't seen you for a long time? Linda, well, we just usually cross paths, but now there's been no connection for 2 weeks. I tried to call her several times, but she didn't answer, so I decided to find out if everything was okay. She has a new number, maybe? There was a heavy silence in the break room. The smell of cheap coffee mixed with the smell of machine oil, and Jake felt his whole body filled with leaden fatigue. Jake, got it. No, you don't have to worry. Everything is fine with her. I'll tell her that you called, of course. Linda, thank you. Take care, Jake. She hung up and Jake was left alone in the small room, clutching the phone. He cursed through his teeth and slammed his fist against the wall so that an old tire advertising calendar fell to the floor. Rick. Hey, is everything okay? I heard a crash. Jake wiped his sweaty brow. Jake. No, dude, it's not okay. I need to go home urgently, okay? Rick. But we have. Jake. Tell Buck I have urgent matters. He will understand. Or he'll fire you, it doesn't matter. Without waiting for an answer, Jake walked out, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the exit. Rick, shocked by his appearance, only nodded in confusion. For the first time in years, Jake quit his job in the middle of his shift. I drove across the city, turning the radio on full blast to drown out my thoughts. The image of Ashley was looming before my eyes, smiling at someone at a table at the Blue Oak restaurant. Or maybe there is another restaurant. He no longer knew. But it was clear she was lying about Linda. She had some kind of secret. When he entered the house, he discovered that Ashley was not there. Her shift at Walmart usually lasted up to 5 days, but now it's only 3 days. But sometimes she was released earlier, or she ran away on her own. Jake rushed into the bedroom, pulled out the dresser drawers, and looked through her things. He didn't notice anything special, except maybe new underwear, which he didn't know about. So she has money. But from where? Hearing the front door slam, he froze in the corridor. Ashley walked into the living room and threw her keys on the table. When I saw him, I shuddered, as if I hadn't expected it. Works. What are you doing at home so early? Jake. I know you're lying to me. Linda called. She said that you don't visit her. She looked at him from under her brows. Her lips trembled. Works. This is rubbish. What do you care about? Jake. What do I need? Are you serious? I'm your husband, and you're lying to me, leading me by the nose, saying that you're going to a friend's house, but... Where are you going, Ashley? What's happening? She backed up against the wall, but didn't look scared, rather furious, like a cat that had been cornered. Works. Yes, anywhere. This is my life. I'm tired of sitting in this house where no one needs me. I'm tired of listening to your excuses about tomorrow will be better. Jake, you didn't say who you were with at Blue Oak. I found a receipt in your bag. Her eyes widened sharply. She blushed, but immediately pulled herself together. Works. Rummaged through my things, huh? Great, now you're also a spy. And I thought you were just a rude lout. Jake, tell the truth, damn it. Who were you there with? She bit her lip, as if debating whether to confess or continue playing. Her gaze darted to the window, then returned to it. Works. With a friend. Yes, from Dallas. Her name is Jessica. We decided to go to a restaurant. It's none of your business at all. Jake, is it true? And why have I never heard of Jessica? Stop it, Ash. I'm not a fool. She rolled her eyes. Works. Or maybe because we don't discuss anything other than cars. He felt a lump getting stuck in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. This conversation began to look like a fight. They both hit each other with words, each trying to drive the other into a dead end. Jake, tell the truth. I don't care if she's terrible, but at least don't lie to my face. Ashley froze and then shot him an angry look. Works. Fuck you, Jake. Do you want the truth? I'm tired of your eternal poverty and fuel oil. I wanted to feel like a woman and not a servant with your stinking rags. And yes, I was in a restaurant with a man who knows how to treat me the way I deserve. She threw these words like spit and ran out of the living room. In the corridor, I grabbed my jacket and flew out into the street like a whirlwind. Jake rushed after her, but only managed to see her start her car and take off, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. He stood on the porch, clenching his fists. The words, "with a man who knows how to treat me," rang in my ears like a siren. So, after all, someone is there. His wife cheated on him, or at least is about to cheat on him, and he did nothing to prevent it. Jake, damn. The neighbor, an old man from next door, was poking around in his garden and cast a curious glance at Jake. Jake didn't say hello, dove back into the house, and slammed his fist into the doorframe as hard as he could. The wood cracked pitifully, but it hurt my hand more. He felt his whole body begin to tremble, a mixture of anger, resentment, and the feeling that the ground was leaving from under his feet. The phone rang in the silence. It sounded especially loud. Jake answered the phone, hoping it was Ashley, but saw Rick's number. Jake. Yes, Rick? Rick. Listen, I told Buck that you have personal problems. He seemed to understand. But what if you come tomorrow? We have 2 cars registered there for repairs. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to pull himself together. Jake. Yes, I will. Sorry for leaving like that. Rick. It's okay, buddy. We'll manage. Just don't do anything stupid yourself, okay? He wanted to say, I won't, but his throat was dry. I didn't want to answer the truth that he had the wind in his head and his heart was breaking. So I just muttered, thank you, and hung up. It was starting to get dark outside, although it was barely 5 o'clock. Jake went out onto the porch, sat down on an old chair, and took out a cigarette, even though he had given it up in the army. But now, it seems, was not the situation to protect the lungs. He took a drag and coughed. Jake, if she's already with someone. Then what? Divorce? Scandal? What if this is a temporary quirk? He understood. Everything was heading towards disaster. This crack, which he had noticed for a long time, became a gaping abyss. A wild desire to find out the truth flared up in my chest. Right now, take the car, go look for Ashley, pin her against the wall, and interrogate her. But part of him screamed that this would only ruin everything completely. She's already on the edge. The cigarette burned out. He put it out on the porch step and looked towards the garage. There, under the tarp, sat the 1969 Mustang GT, his pride, his dream, which he had spent years restoring. It was already running. He entered the garage and ran his hand along the Mustang's fender. The paint is black and shiny. Mentally, he imagined Ashley, but she really wanted more. Trips, traveling, feeling special. Maybe he really couldn't handle it. His legs gave way, and he sank into a small chair by the workbench. There was a photo on the wall of the 2 of them, Ashley laughing and cuddling up to him, and him in military uniform, right after returning from Iraq. They were young and in love then. Jake was proud that he had her, and she was proud that she had him. Where is it now, he thought. The evening covered the town with a pinkish sunset, but darkness deepened in Jake's heart. He sat in the garage until almost 10, but Ashley never showed up. He went to sleep on the sofa in the living room without turning off the light in the hallway. The old lamp blinked, and he listened to every sound outside the window. Will she come back? I asked myself. But Ashley didn't return that night. The next evening, Ashley still showed up at home tired, but with full makeup, in expensive high-heeled sandals that Jake had never seen before. He heard her open the door, but did not go to meet her. He sat in the kitchen with the lights off In front of him was a bottle of beer and an empty plate with leftovers from yesterday's scrambled eggs. As Ashley passed the doorway, he called out quietly, "Jake, work?" She shuddered, not noticing him in the darkness, and turned around. "Works. Are you here? Why are you sitting in the dark like a ghost?" "Jake, I was waiting for you. We haven't spoken normally for a long time." "Works. Talk? About what?" "Jake. About us, damn it." She stepped into the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, and Jake squinted at the sudden flash. Now he saw that she looked smart, a short dress, jewelry. "Works. There is nothing to discuss here. I'm tired. I want to take a shower and go to bed." "Jake, wait." He jumped up, walked around the table, stood in front of her, looking into her eyes. "We can't live like this. Maybe you can tell me who this man is." She jerked as if he had hit her with the words. "Works. What makes you think there's a man there?" "Jake, I'm not an idiot, Ash. You said it yourself. Someone is treating you the way you deserve. And I see you spending money on restaurants. Do you really think that I'm blind?" She crossed her arms over her chest and raised her chin in a defiant gesture. "Works. Okay, since you're so smart. Yes, I'm dating a man who appreciates me. He is successful. He knows how to provide for a woman. And don't worry about, someday we'll buy a new stove." "Jake, how long ago?" "Works. Several weeks. But during this time, he has done more for me than you have done in the last 2 years." Jake closed his eyes, trying to process what he heard. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like it would burst out of my chest. "Jake, so, that's it. Did you just find someone else? Is that the end for us?" "Works. Jake, I don't want to continue this farce. Our marriage has been cracking at the seams for a long time. I'm unhappy." "Jake, but why didn't you try to talk? Or at least, hell, we could try to save, well, I don't know. Psychologist, joint vacation." "Works. Vacation? For what money? And lately, any conversation with you comes down to the fact that I want a lot, that I need to calm down. Jake, I'm tired." She turned away and walked to the sink and poured herself some water. In the kitchen, all that could be heard was her ragged breathing and the ticking of the clock above the table. Jake looked at her shoulders, on which the light of the lamp fell, and remembered how he once hugged them. How I kissed that neck. How she laughed, and now everything is like a stranger. "Jake, who is he?" She put the glass on the table and slowly turned around. "Works. It doesn't matter. He is a lawyer, he has his own practice, his own office. He will deal with all legal issues when—" She paused, as if she had let it slip, and then shook her hair. "Works. When I file for divorce." The words fell to the floor like a heavy stone. Jake felt like everything inside was breaking. He knew that everything was bad, he knew about the other man, but he still believed that he could be saved. And now, divorce. "Jake, divorce? Do you want? Are you sure?" "Works. Sure. I'll submit the documents one of these days." He looked at her silently, as if she had said something out of the ordinary, like, "I'm flying to the moon." But it was reality that hit him over the head. My legs wobbled from realization. "Jake, but why? Yes, we have problems, but damn, Ash, we've been together for 10 years. Works. Sometimes people disagree. We've become strangers, Jake, and you feel it. All we do is argue." "Jake, but I still love you." She looked at him as if these words no longer meant anything. "Works. Sorry, but I don't feel it anymore. I tried, really, but everything died." She turned away and ran a hand over her forehead, brushing away the tears that might have formed in the corners of her eyes. But she immediately straightened up, making her voice harsher. "Works. I'll pack my things and leave today. I'll be staying with a friend until, well, until I decide what's next." "Jake, you said that you have no friends except Linda. Or did you also lie?" She didn't answer, as if it was none of his business, as if he was no one anymore. She went into the bedroom, threw a sports bag on the bed, and began silently throwing clothes into it. Jake stood in the doorway, unable to move. I watched her take dresses, jeans, cosmetics, everything as if she was throwing away the memories of her life with him. Works. Please don't stand over me. It's hard. I don't want a scandal. Jake. Don't you want a scandal? And I don't want you to leave. But does this matter to anyone? She froze for a moment, then looked back, and regret flashed in her eyes. Works. Sorry, Jake, but I decided. He didn't say anything, just ran out of the room, feeling like everything was bubbling inside. My heart was breaking. Stop her. But the mind screamed, she doesn't want this. He went out onto the porch, took cigarettes out of his pocket, and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. It seemed to him that this was all a bad dream. A few minutes later, Ashley came out of the house with a bag. The sound of her heels on the wooden floor of the veranda was reminiscent of the blows of a hammer on a coffin, so their past was imprinted once and for all. She walked past Jake, avoiding his gaze. Jake. And yet, I love you, Ash. She stopped for a moment, bowed her head, but did not turn around. She said quietly, Works. Sorry, I need to leave. And without letting him answer, she quickly went to her car. A minute later, she disappeared around the bend, leaving only a cloud of dust. Jake slowly lowered himself onto the wooden step and exhaled the smoke from his cigarette. Silence hit him like a concrete slab. The neighbor's dog barked behind the fence, and it was the only sound in the whole world. She's gone, a simple thought, but it tore at my heart. Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes and his throat tightening. He covered his face with his hands, but could not cry. It's too painful and offensive. He hardly slept that night. A strange numbness came over him. Memories came to mind: the wedding, her laughter, how they chose old furniture together because they couldn't afford expensive ones. How he was returning from the army and she threw herself on his neck. Now it's all like someone else's film. The next morning, he woke up on the same couch, in clothes, with a phone in his hands. The first thing I did was check to see if Ashley had called. No. No calls, no messages. Resentment surged in my soul, giving way to emptiness. He looked into the bedroom. Everything seemed in order, but her clothes, some of her cosmetics, and her shoes were gone. The closet was half empty, as if a piece of his life had been cut out. Jake. How to continue to live. But life didn't wait. I had to go to work. Buck's Auto opened at 7 and had plenty of customers as usual. Jake understood that if he didn't continue to work now, he would simply go crazy sitting at home alone. He arrived at the workshop, automatically changed his clothes, and grabbed his tools. Rick, seeing his look, knew that something big had happened, but did not ask questions. He just patted him on the shoulder and said, Rick, hold on, brother, everything will work out. Whatever it is. Jake smiled wryly, settled down, sounded mocking. But he didn't want to dump everything on his friend now. I had to hold on, at least not to go crazy. The very mention of Ashley made his fists clench, not from anger, but from a sense of his own helplessness. By lunchtime, he was completely immersed in repairing another Toyota, changing gaskets, checking spark plugs. Mechanics had always been a refuge for him, a place where his brain focused on clear actions. But even there, thoughts of divorce crawled like shadows, and he knew this was not the end of the nightmare. Returning to an empty house in the evening, he found her cup of unfinished coffee standing on the table. It's like she left in a hurry and won't come back. The cold was twisting my insides. Jake moved the cup away as if it might burn his hands. He took up a pointless task. He began to repair the creaky door to the back porch, then decided to sort through a box of old tools. Just not to sit and look at empty rooms. I noticed a photo in a frame. He and Ashley on the shore of the lake, smiles on half their faces. He took the frame off the wall and hid it in a drawer. It was unbearable to see this. Jake. She said I broke her. How? When? The evening dragged on endlessly. He put a pot of water on the stove to cook something like pasta, but he had no appetite. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the wall. Then he picked up the phone and dialed Ashley's number. Several beeps, no one answered. Dialed again, turned off. This means he doesn't want to talk or be next to that same lawyer. The night passed just as painfully. It seemed as if the walls of the house had become even tighter and colder. He could not sleep in the marital bed, where everything reminded him of her. As a result, I fell asleep on the sofa listening to the morning radio. On the third morning after she left, the doorbell rang. Jake, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, opened it, expecting to see Ashley or the mailman. But in front of him stood a man in a suit, with a briefcase and an unpleasantly cold gaze. "Man, good afternoon. Are you Mr. Reynolds?" "Jake." "Yes." "Who are you?" The man held out an envelope. "Man, my name is Stevens. I'm a courier from the law firm Morgan and Partners. A subpoena is handed to you. Please sign here." Jake took the envelope in his hands, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. He signed, the man nodded and left. Jake closed the door and opened the envelope, and my heart skipped a beat. Notice of lawsuit against Jake Reynolds, plaintiff Ashley Reynolds. The words cruel treatment, moral and physical damage cut my eyes like a knife. He reread it several times, unable to believe it. She accused him of pressure. He allegedly used violence. Jake. Damn. Ashley. This means that this is assistance of a lawyer. And she doesn't just leave, she intends to throw him out of life completely, making him out to be a monster. Jake sank to the floor, clutching the envelope. The eyes burned with anger and pain. He didn't understand how the man he loved could do this. But deep down I felt, this is a new round of their nightmare, and there are only more blows ahead. Jake lived the next few days as if in a fog. Every morning he woke up to an empty house, and the first thing he saw was an envelope with a summons on the table. He did not put it away in the box, as if he hoped that everything would change overnight and the envelope would disappear. But nothing changed. The work became hard labor. He tried to concentrate on the engines, the brakes, but every little thing reminded him that he had a trial coming up, and he had neither a lawyer nor money for one. And how can you defend yourself against false accusations of abuse? Everyone who knew him knew that Jake would rather cut off his own hand than hit his wife. But the court may need evidence. One day, during the next break, Rick quietly asked, "Rick, listen, I see that you are completely tortured. Maybe you need help. I know one lawyer. He is inexpensive." Jake stared at a spot on the floor. "Jake, thank you, Rick, but I don't know. I have no savings for this, except to borrow. But damn, this is all so unreal. The Ashley I know would never go along with this nonsense. So, she's not the same anymore. Rick, I sympathize, brother, but you need to pull yourself together. Otherwise, it will all go sideways." Jake knew Rick was right, but it felt as if he was fighting in another dimension where there is no logic. Walking out into the parking lot, Jake took out his phone and dialed Ashley's number. Horns. There is no answer. A couple of minutes later, I received a text message. "Please don't call me. All questions go through my lawyer. E." Jake. My lawyer. That's how it is now. He remembered Ashley mentioning that her new acquaintance was a lawyer. It was probably his doing. Professionally played out. Accuse Jack of violence. Demand alimony, a house. And how will he, an ordinary mechanic, fight back? On his way home, he stopped at the Rusty Nail Bar. There, among tired truckers and local drinkers, he ordered himself some whiskey. Although he was not a fan of strong alcohol, now he wanted something heavier than beer. There was a terrible feeling in my soul. Bartender. Hard day. Jake. Yeah, it's been a tough month. The bartender just nodded, accustomed to the stories of visitors. Jake took a sip, feeling a fiery wave burning his throat. He sat looking into the mirror behind the counter, where his tired face was reflected. There were also reflected men laughing loudly at the next table, and a TV in the corner showing some kind of boxing. Boxing, Jake thought. I'd better learn to box, since I'm being accused of beatings. The phone rang the number of Buck, the owner of the workshop. Jake picked up the phone. Garden. Boy, what's going on with you? Rick says you're in trouble and sometimes you leave early. Listen, I can't keep a mechanic who is in prostration every day for so long. Jake, sorry, Buck. I have a crisis in my family, divorce, all that. I will try not to let work suffer. It's just hard. Garden. I understand, but business is business. Pull yourself together or take a vacation if necessary. Just don't leave everything in the air. Jake, I understand. Tomorrow I'll be as sharp as a bayonet. I give you my word. He hung up and exhaled. Problems with work were the last thing he needed right now. After taking another sip, Jake stood up, threw a few bills on the counter, and went home, or rather, to an empty house, where there was no dinner waiting for him and no wife waiting for him. On the threshold, he saw that there was an envelope lying under the door again. This time, some kind of copy of documents. A statement of claim for divorce, a petition for preventive measures. These legal formulations dazzled in my eyes. It turned out that Ashley wanted a restraining order to keep him from coming within 200 yards of her. Wow, he thought bitterly. They made me out to be a real maniac. The lines of text pricked like needles, regular quarrels, psychological pressure. The plaintiff fears for his safety. He never said a loud word to scare her. Apart from the latest quarrels, there was no assault there either. Jake, what kind of nonsense? She, why? He understood that this was part of the plan. Kyle, her new man, helped draw up all these papers. If they believe her words, then she will get the house, and he will have to move out. If she makes any wrong move, the police will take her side, and he will have little chance to defend his truth. He looked up at the wedding photo that hung in the hallway. He threw it off the wall in a rage. The frame broke, pieces flew across the floor, and for a moment Jake felt wild satisfaction. The symbol of their marriage had shattered. But then his heart sank. I still love her, fool. The next day, he finally decided to contact a lawyer, an old friend of his father, who lived in a neighboring town. He picked up the phone and listened gloomily. Advocate. The case is complicated, Jake. Without direct evidence of your innocence, it can be difficult, but I'll try to help. Jake. Thank you, Martin. The lawyer explained that it was necessary to appear at the meeting where preliminary measures would be considered, that it was necessary to collect any evidence of peaceful relations or testimony of witnesses. But who will he call? Jake thought. Except maybe Rika and Buck. They don't know how we lived at home. Every day the fear grew inside. Jake waited for the summons with a hearing date, like a death sentence. And one morning she came signed by the judge. Preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Jake. 2 weeks, he muttered, reading the paper. And I could be kicked out of the house, labeled and forced to pay her the entire salary. He collapsed on the sofa, feeling panic rising. You have to fight, otherwise everything will be over, the thought flashed. The day of the meeting arrived a gray morning, drizzling. Jake squeezed into his threadbare jacket and rode to the courthouse in a Mustang. Everything inside was shrinking. He tried not to think about seeing Ashley with someone else. Lawyer Martin was already waiting at the entrance to the courtroom. A man with glasses, bald, with a folder of papers and a tired look. Martin. Hello, guy. Hold on. The hall is there. They entered and took a seat at the defendant's table. The hall was small, with 3 rows of benches. The judge, an elderly man in a robe, was leafing through some documents. Ashley and her lawyer, a thin guy in an expensive suit, were already sitting opposite. Next to him is a man, also in a formal suit, with a cold gaze and a self-confident smile. Kyle, Jake guessed, feeling a burning sensation in his chest. My heart began to pound at the sight of Ashley. She was dressed in an elegant dress, her hair neatly styled, and there was no emotion on her face when she met his eyes. She just pursed her lips and turned away. Beside her, Kyle whispered something, and she nodded, looking straight ahead. The judge cleared his throat. Judge. Good afternoon. Let's get started. Case No. 2025-3 for divorce. Plaintiff Mrs. Reynolds. Defendant Mr. Reynolds. The topic of today's meeting is consideration of the application for interim measures. Are you, Mrs. Reynolds, saying that you fear for your safety? The plaintiff's lawyer stood up and bowed to the judge. Advocate. Yes, Your Honor. My client states that the defendant has a history of violent outbursts and domestic violence. We are asking for a temporary restraining order and an obligation for the defendant to leave the house for the duration of the proceedings. Judge. It's clear. Do you have proof? The lawyer nodded to Kyle, who stood up and said clearly. Kyle. I was present at one of the incidents where Mr. Reynolds threw an object towards Mrs. Reynolds and shouted abuse. She was scared. Jake's eyes widened. What subject? He never saw Kyle at his home. It's all a lie. Jake. Your Honor, this is not true. This man wasn't even in my house. The judge gave a stern look. Judge. Silence in the hall. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds. You will express your position later. Jake clenched his fists and sat down. Martin, his lawyer, stood up, trying to speak clearly. Martin. Dear court, my client denies all charges. There is not a single official complaint to the police, not a single medical certificate. I request that the petition be rejected as unfounded. The plaintiff's lawyer smiled coldly and took out a photograph. Advocate. Here's a photo of Mrs. Reynolds with marks on her wrist. She did not go to doctors because she was afraid of further threats. Now, feeling supported, I decided to make the matter public. Jake almost cursed. That's a lie. Damn. He saw the judge looking at the photo, then looking at Ashley. Judge. Mrs. Reynolds, do you confirm that these are traces of the consequences of assault the defendant? Ashley made a pitiful face and nodded. Works. Yes, he grabbed me when he had a fit of anger. Jake pressed his lips together until it hurt. How can she lie like that, looking straight into your eyes? He wanted to scream, but he understood that hysteria would not be appreciated in the courtroom. The judge leafed through the papers and adjusted his glasses. Judge. Fine. Based on the information presented, in the interest of the plaintiff's safety, I am granting the motion for a temporary restraining order. Mr. Reynolds is required to leave the shared home immediately until the end of the hearing. All financial issues will be considered during the main process. Jake almost fell. He didn't believe that everything was so fast. The plaintiff's lawyer bowed. Advocate. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge called a break, and everyone began to leave. Jake froze in place, feeling a lump forming in his throat. Martin touched him on the shoulder. Martin. We need to go out. Blindly obeying, Jake walked towards the exit. He glanced at Ashley, who was already collecting papers. Kyle stood nearby, touching her hand carefully, but she didn't pull away. Not a wife, but someone else's woman. Near the exit, Kyle caught up with them, tall, well-groomed, with a grin on his lips. Kyle. Mr. Reynolds, I hope you understand everything. For your own good, stay away from Ashley. Jake. Bastard. You just want her and my home. Kyle grinned. Kyle. Rudeness only confirms her words. Good luck in life. Turning around, he left. Jake felt like he was about to hit him, but Martin held his shoulder. Martin. Calm down, otherwise they will now file a new lawsuit for assault right in the courthouse. Jake suddenly realized how hopeless everything was. He goes out onto the street, and he no longer has his own home. He can't go back there, or he'll violate the warrant. There is also no money to rent anything decent. Rick, maybe I should stay with him. A thought flashed. My legs were giving way. Jake. Okay, Martin. Shall we continue the battle? Martin. Yes, but the chances are not too high if we don't find something to refute her testimony. Jake nodded and blinked away his angry tears. There is uncertainty ahead. He never thought that life could collapse so quickly. Divorce is one thing, but so that you are exposed as a domestic tyrant. It was hell, and he ended up in it. The day before the main divorce hearing, Jake was sitting in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. After he was banned from living in his own house, he spent the night either at Rick's or in this wretched room, where it smelled of mold, and from the window you could only see a junkyard of old cars. It's a dark irony. He's a mechanic, and all around him there are drowned cars that can no longer be helped. Martin called him late in the evening. Martin. Tomorrow is the final hearing. The issue of division of property and alimony will be decided. They have their own witnesses. They say there is some neighbor who is ready to confirm the screaming and fighting. Jake chuckled grimly. Neighbor? Probably old Granny Wilson, who always grumbles and hates noise. He remembered her tapping her cane on his fence when he was welding late at night. Jake. Clear. Martin, do we have a chance? Martin. There's always a chance, but they're serious. The night passed restlessly. It was difficult to fall asleep only in the morning. Jake got up at 6, dressed in his only jacket, and tried to drink coffee from the machine in the hotel lobby. The bitter drink did not invigorate, but there was nothing to do. At the courthouse, he again met Martin, who immediately said, "Be calm, don't shout," and they entered the courtroom together. Again Ashley, again this lawyer, again Kyle, sitting a little further away. Couples of curious spectators and the press in a small town, any high-profile case attracts attention. The judge is the same, gloomy, with a stone face. The review has begun. Ashley's lawyer spoke first. Advocate. My client was subjected to humiliation and physical violence. She wants to get a divorce and asks the court to transfer the house to her, as well as to impose alimony due to her difficult moral condition. Jake listened as he spewed lies. Then they called a witness, indeed, Granny Wilson, an old lady who lived across the street. Advocate. Mrs. Wilson, tell me what you heard and saw. Granny. I heard Jake yelling at his wife more than once, shouting that he would kill her. Of course, I'm old, but I still have great hearing. Jake almost jumped up. I never said that. But Martin motioned for silence. Granny. And I also saw how she ran out from him in tears. He ran after her and swung at her. Yes, he definitely swung it. The judge nodded, writing it down. Then they gave the floor to Martin. Martin. Mrs. Wilson, are you sure you saw Mr. Reynolds swing? Maybe he was just waving his hands in an argument. Granny. Yes, of course, I'm not blind. He definitely took a swing. Martin. Did you receive any money or rewards from Mrs. Reynolds? The old lady frowned. Granny. How dare you? I am a respected city dweller. The judge slammed his gavel, dissuading Martin. In general, everything went according to Ashley and Kyle's scenario. At the end of the hearing, the judge looked up wearily. Judge, the parties have spoken. Taking into account the evidence, the testimony of the witness, and the lack of counterarguments from the defendant, I decide to satisfy the plaintiff's demands. The house purchased during the marriage remains with Mrs. Reynolds. The 1969 Ford Mustang, as joint property, is transferred to the plaintiff. The defendant is also required to pay alimony in the amount established by the court formula, taking into account his income. There was a noise in the hall. Jake turned pale when he heard that the Mustang, his pride, his dream, was also leaving Ashley. He knew she couldn't stand him, so it was Kyle's job. He saw him grinning, looking in his direction. Judge, the decision is final. The case is closed. The hammer hit, and that was it. Jake lost his house, his car, his money. Martin sighed heavily and turned to Jake. Martin, sorry, I did what I could, but they had reinforced concrete evidence. It looks like they have prepared thoroughly. Jake looked up and saw Ashley. She held her gaze on him for a second, and a shadow of sadness or guilt flashed through it. But then Kyle came up to her, put his arm around her, and they walked out together. Jake walked towards the exit, shuffling blindly. On my back, I felt the gaze of strangers who whispered, "This is the husband who beat his wife." He wanted to scream and punch the walls, but he knew that this would only make his situation worse. The sun was shining outside, but for him the world was plunged into darkness. He was ruined and deceived. All that remained was quiet rage in the depths of my soul. A week has passed since the false trial. Jake finally moved into a motel, spent the night there, and during the day continued to work at Buck's Auto, trying not to go crazy. Surprisingly, Buck did not fire him, and even sometimes asked cautious questions, such as, "Maybe we need support." But Jake only remained stubbornly silent. One evening, when it was already dark, He went to the rusty nail bar to drink beer and forget about the nightmare in which he lived for at least an hour. He had barely taken his first sip when the phone rang. Unfamiliar number. Jake. Yes. Female voice. Hello, are you Mr. Reynolds? My name is Sarah. I work at a transportation agency. I was asked to call and warn that tomorrow at 9 a tow truck will arrive at your former address to pick up a 1969 Ford Mustang. Don't worry, everything is according to the court's decision. Jake dropped the glass from his hand and the beer spilled on the table. Will they come for the Mustang that the court awarded to Ashley? Hell, he didn't even get to say goodbye properly. Jake. Yes, I understand. I will be there. He hung up, feeling a wave of despair rise within him. The Mustang was more than just a car. It was his second love. He put years of work into it. And now we have to watch him being taken away. In the morning, he arrived at the house that was once his. A large truck with a winch stood at the gate. The driver was smoking. On the porch, Ashley, leaning on the railing, next to Kyle with an important look. Apparently, they were afraid that Jake would make a fuss. Jake. Have you come to take my soul too? Kyle grinned. Kyle. Well, technically it belongs to Ashley now. But she decided that we would sell the car. Or maybe I'm just a driver myself. I love old cars. At these words, Jake clenched his fists. Jake. Can I look at it again? Ashley nodded, avoiding his gaze. Works. Okay, just not for long. Jake walked into the yard. The garage door was open. The 1969 Mustang GT sat inside. Jake ran his hand over the cold metal of the hood. Jake. Sorry, buddy. Footsteps were heard from behind. The tow truck driver appeared. Driver. Let's roll. I have a schedule. Jake nodded reluctantly and helped him move the car into the driveway. Then the driver secured the Mustang with a winch, and it did not resist like Jake himself. He obediently walked towards his end. Kyle stood at the porch and whispered something in Ashley's ear. She nodded, but she had a strange expression on her face, a mixture of guilt and irritation. Once the Mustang was loaded, Jake turned to her. Jake, I just have one question, Ash. Why all this? So many lies. Couldn't they have just walked away without these false accusations? She blinked and bit her lip. Works. I needed to provide myself with protection. You wouldn't let me take everything away calmly. Or, Kyle said it's more reliable. Kyle stepped forward. Kyle, listen, buddy, she was unhappy in this marriage. I just helped her get what she was entitled to. Jake, she received much more than she was entitled to. You both know it. Kyle raised an eyebrow, as if surprised at Jake's courage. Kyle, the law is a flexible thing. Can't play by the rules. Your problems. Jake looked at him, his confident grin, and thought about clenching his fist and punching him in the face. But he knew that he would end up behind bars. He tried to catch Ashley's eye, to see if there was even a drop of remorse left in her. Works. Okay, Kyle, let's go. Why stretch? The tow truck driver got into the cab and started the engine. The Mustang shook on the platform, as if crying with the last roar of the engine. Jake felt a tightness in his chest. He was losing the last symbol of his dream. Jake. Goodbye, friend. The engine roared, and the tow truck moved off. Kyle and Ashley walked to their black BMW and got inside. Ashley glanced at Jake for a moment before closing the door. There was something in his eyes that looked like, I'm sorry. Or maybe he just imagined it. Kyle. Goodbye, Mr. Reynolds. I hope you find a better life for yourself. They drove away after the tow truck, and there was a booming silence on the street. Jake was left standing in the yard that was once his. Now even the grass under her feet belonged to Ashley. He kicked an empty canister lying near the garage. The canister flew against the wall, ringing. My eyes stung. He slowly walked out the gate and looked back at the house for the last time. He seemed silent, alien. The neighbor's dog barked, apparently sensing his presence. That's it, he thought. Jake Reynolds sat in his pickup truck on the side of the highway, holding his phone in front of him. Just a week ago, he had a house, albeit one that smelled of tobacco smoke, and a garage where a Mustang was parked. And now both the house and the car all belong to Ashley according to the court decision. He was forced to live in a cheap motel where rusty water flowed from the tap, and some neighbors were always arguing behind the wall. Today, he received unexpected news. The number of Tim Rogers, an army comrade whom he had not seen for 2 years, appeared on the screen. They served together in Iraq for a long time, changing brake pads on Hummers and swearing at the sand that clogged the carburetors. After demobilization, Tim went into long-distance combat and Jake returned to his hometown. They corresponded from time to time, but over time the connection almost broke off. And today Tim suddenly called, having learned through mutual friends that Jake was in big trouble. From that short conversation, Jake knew one thing: Tim was ready to help. "Leave your shacks and come to me," he heard on the phone. "We don't abandon our own, remember?" "Tim, I heard you have a terrible mess there. Divorce, lawyers, some kind of tough stuff. I'm in Texas until the end of the month, then I'll be back on the road. Come to me, my house is spacious, I'll explain everything to my wife. She always respected you. Let's figure out how to help." Jake hesitated. He didn't want to be a burden. But as soon as he remembered the stench of the motel room, the sickly gray paint of the walls, and the mountain of unpaid bills, his hesitation dissipated. He really needed to escape from this quagmire, at least for a while. And here he is, on the highway that winds through endless expanses. The speedometer reads about 70 miles per hour, the road is empty, and he allows himself to press the gas a little harder. A couple of hours behind the wheel passed in silence. After passing several turns, Jake saw Tim's house behind the trees. Small, neat, with a green lawn and a high fence. Tim once said that he bought it in the north of the state, where the air is fresher and land is cheaper. The pickup slowly pulled into the driveway. Tim was already standing at the porch, strong, squat, wearing a t-shirt with the inscription Army. In his hand, he held a bottle of whiskey. Seeing that the pickup had stopped, Tim put the bottle on the veranda railing and went down the steps. "Tim, have you finally arrived, wanderer? Unload, brother." Jake turned off the engine, got out, and Tim immediately embraced him in a short but tight hug. It smelled of tobacco and road dust, a mixture familiar from Iraq. "Tim, damn, you're exhausted. Let's go, I'll pour you some normal whiskey." Melissa, Tim's wife, appeared at the door, a slender woman in her early 30s, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, her hair in a ponytail. Her gaze was soft, sympathetic. "Melissa, hello, Jake. I heard you're in trouble. Well, we have a room, an air mattress. Will you get by?" "Jake, thank you. I hope I won't interfere." Somewhere behind her, two curious children's faces flashed: Tim's son and daughter. They peeked out from behind the door frame, exchanging glances. Jake waved his hand weakly at them, but the children immediately slipped away. Apparently, they are embarrassed. Tim patted Jake on the shoulder. "Tim, come on, bring in the junk. You don't have a carload of things, do you?" Jake pointed to a couple of bags in the back of the pickup. Jake: "Yes, almost nothing. What I managed to grab when. Well, they forced me to move out." Tim knitted his eyebrows, the veins on his cheekbones began to play, but he didn't say anything. "I just took my bag and went to the house." Jake noticed how Melissa sighed quietly, looking away as if she sympathized with him, but did not know how to help. The room Jake was given was at the end of the hallway, next to the storage room. Tim: "Here, settle down. I understand, not a mansion, but better than a motel with plywood walls." Jake: "Tim, thank you, really." Tim: "Come on. We've been to hell together. Wasn't that our agreement to pull each other out of any pile of dung?" With these words, Tim slammed the door, leaving Jake alone. He put his bags against the wall and sat down on the mattress. My head was buzzing from travel and hassle. Half an hour later, Melissa knocked quietly and offered dinner. In the kitchen, the children were already sitting down at the table. Tim was opening a second bottle of beer, and something appetizing was sizzling on the stove: bacon, judging by the smell. Jake felt his stomach churn. Melissa, I didn't have much time, so I made scrambled eggs and bacon. I hope it's okay. Jake, certainly. Everything is fine. They sat down at the table Tim, Jake, Melissa, and two children, 10-year-old Tom and 7-year-old Claire. The children looked at Jake with curiosity, and Tim entertained everyone with stories about long-distance adventures. Jake listened, but didn't participate much. He reflected on how his life had descended so abruptly into a hole. It was as if someone had pressed the stop button, and everything that was there fell apart like sand through your fingers. At the end of dinner, Tim pushed a glass of whiskey towards him. Tim, have a drink with me. Let's drink away the grief, and tomorrow we'll think about what to do. Melissa frowned, but remained silent, apparently deciding that one evening could be allowed to relax. After dinner, the children went to do their homework. Melissa cleaned up and went to the bedroom. Tim motioned for Jake to come outside. It was cool on the veranda. The lantern cast a dim light on the wooden flooring. Tim, tell me how it happened. Jake took a drag and cleared his throat. Jake, long story. I found a lawyer and brought fake evidence to court. As a result, my house and Mustang were taken away from me and alimony was also ordered. He said this with such contempt that Tim realized that he was talking about Ashley's new man. Tim, listen, this is tough. Didn't you try to fight? Jake, I tried, but he had everything in his hands: acquaintances in court, money, connections. I'm an ordinary mechanic in a workshop, and my nerves were on edge. They handled everything clearly, but I was confused. Tim was silent, taking a drag from his cigarette. Somewhere in the distance, a dog or coyote howled. Tim, understand. But what now? Will you stay with me for a couple of weeks, and then? Jake, don't know. There is no point in living in the city. Keep bumping into memories, and this guy took her away. Or rather, already, divorce. Maybe I'll get the hell out of here and find a job on the highway, just like you. Tim threw the cigarette butt over the railing and turned to Jake. Tim, listen, you have always been a fighter. Maybe you'll recover first, collect your thoughts, and if you want to take revenge, or at least get yours back, let's think about how to do it. Humanly, without breaking the law. Jake lowered his head. The law. What kind of law does he have if they did everything against him illegally, but formally purely? A glimmer of some dark thought was already stirring in his head, but he was not yet ready to follow it. He patted Tim on the shoulder. Jake, thank you, friend. I'll just sleep today, okay? We'll figure it out later. Tim nodded, silently squeezing his forearm. As Jake walked into the house, he noticed Melissa looking at them from the bedroom window. The next morning, Jake woke up from noises. In the next room, Tim was loudly discussing something with Melissa, and the children seemed to be running along the corridor, getting ready for school. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. He sat up on the mattress and rubbed his eyes. My head was buzzing. Yesterday's cigarettes and whiskey reminded me of myself. Looking around the room, he noticed that the window was slightly open, and a cool breeze was swaying the blinds. Muffled sounds of an engine could be heard behind the house. Apparently, Tim had gone to the store or somewhere on business. Trying not to make any noise, Jake got dressed and went out into the corridor. Melissa stood at the stove, frying pancakes. She tensed when she saw Jake, but then forced a smile. Melissa, good morning. Breakfast is still warm if you want it. Tim will be back in an hour. She spoke calmly, but there was tension in her voice. Jake understood. She couldn't be blamed. Her husband's old friend suddenly burst into their prosperous life with his problems, and it was unknown how it would all end. Jake, thank you. I'll eat and maybe go on business. I don't want to bother you. Melissa, yes, you're not bothering me. Just be careful, okay? Tim is very supportive of you, but don't forget, we have children. Jake caught the hidden meaning. If you have anger, resentment, do not bring it into our house. He nodded, understanding everything without words. However, things didn't work out for Jake. Jake thought about going to the job center, but a feeling of apathy overtook him, and he simply stayed at Tim's house. Tim returned with half a dozen beer cans and a snack of chips. He said that he sent his wife and children to visit relatives. Melissa, of course, was unhappy, but he assured her that I'll be helping Jake come to his senses for a couple of days. Tim: well, brother, is it a day of manly talk? Shall we have a beer? Jake, although he understood that this was not the best solution, could not refuse. He was depressed, and drowning his grief in alcohol became habitual for him after everything that had happened. It got dark so imperceptibly. They sat in the kitchen and opened a second packet of chips. Now Jake looked at the bottle of beer, and he was sad that life had turned out so broken. Tim, already quite drunk, chatted incessantly. Tim: you know, Melissa is not an angel either. We sometimes quarrel. But damn, she did what she did, you know? Some kind of piece of paper, a court case. It's disgusting when it's against your husband. Jake: oh, you bastard. He leaned back in his chair. A picture appeared before my eyes. Ashley in the arms of that lawyer, her satisfied face as they left the courtroom. Anger flared up in my chest like coal. Tim: maybe if I were you, I don't know, I would rip his hands off. Jake smiled wryly. Jake: I would like to, but he has connections, and I would have been sent to prison at the very least. Tim waved it off. Tim: well, maybe not with your hands. There are other ways. There was an awkward pause for a moment. The room became too quiet. Only the ticking of the clock sounded like a hammer. Jake understood that Tim had said out loud what he himself was afraid to think about. He shook his head, driving away the thoughts. Jake: let's better have one more and go to sleep. Tomorrow my head will be pounding, but maybe we'll come up with something useful. Tim: agree. They drank another can of beer, and by midnight, they staggered to their rooms. Jake collapsed onto the mattress, feeling everything spin, and only one phrase was pounding in my temples: there are other ways. The day passed in a similar fog. Tim did not leave the house at all, citing the fact that his long-distance travel would begin in a couple of weeks, and he could afford a vacation. Melissa, returning from her relatives, saw a mountain of empty bottles and almost exploded. Melissa: Tim, you promised to help him come to his senses and not to drive him into unconsciousness. Children look at you like you are clowns. Tim hugged his wife with a guilty look. Jake sat at the table, looking down. However, it so happened that that night they continued anyway. When Melissa went to bed, they went to the garage, sat down on old tires, and continued to grieve as the wind howled. They sat there until 2 in the morning, then Jake wandered along the corridor, bumping into walls. A muffled female voice sounded from Melissa and Tim's bedroom. Tim, are you serious? You have a family, that's enough. Jake didn't hear any more. Everything merged into drunken noise. The morning of the third day after Jake arrived, there was clearly already a lot of light outside, which meant that the day was in full swing. Suddenly, there was a roar. The door flew into the room, and ice water from a metal bucket poured onto the two, not yet completely sober men. Melissa: have a good time lying around, both of you. Children see you drinking at night. Tim: I told you that help Jake, don't get drunk with him. Jake wiped his face, breathing heavily. Drops of water flowed through my hair, down my neck, soaking my t-shirt. Melissa: I love you both, but you are a disgrace to this house. Tim: you have kids, you have a job, and you turned a guest into a drinking companion. Jake: I sympathize with your troubles, but if you want to get out, stop drinking, be a man. She put the bucket on the floor, then pointed a finger at Jake. Melissa: the bathroom is at the end of the corridor, the shower is working. Get yourself in order. Breakfast in half an hour. Then decide how to live further, but you can't do that, alcohol won't help. With these words, she turned around and walked out, loudly stamping her bare feet on the floor. Tim smiled wryly, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Tim: sorry, brother. I didn't think it would go like this. Melissa is right. We went to the wrong place. Jake closed his eyes, feeling that the cold water sobered his thoughts a little. It was embarrassing and disgusting. I remembered yesterday's conversations, fragments. How long can you live like this? Tim picked up the bucket and followed his wife. Jake slowly walked to the bathroom. Ice water flowed through his hair, and along the way he felt his knees shaking and his cheekbones cramping. But in this icy harshness, there was also a drop of relief, as if he had emerged from a sticky fog. Half an hour later, Jake, already more or less sober, was sitting in the kitchen. Melissa placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. He hated oatmeal since childhood, but now he resignedly took a spoon and began to eat. Tim sat opposite, shame also creeping into his gaze. Melissa placed the cups of coffee in front of them and sat down. Her gaze was firm. Melissa, I was silent because I thought you were stressed, Jake. But that's it for now. We need to talk like adults. Jake put down his spoon. The coffee smelled bitter and sour, but inviting. Melissa, do you want to hang your head and continue drinking, or do you want to solve the problem? He was silent, looking down. Tim sighed. Tim. Melissa, I already realized that I need to quit drinking. But he has a situation. Melissa, I know the situation. It makes me sick, honestly. The girl you loved betrayed you, and some bastard lawyer took everything away. Unfair, but your life doesn't end. If you want to return at least something, look for a way out. Don't sit with the bottle. Jake sighed, feeling something akin to gratitude rise within him. Melissa's words were harsh, but there was truth in them. Jake, you're right. I behaved like a wuss. Thanks for shaking it up. Melissa softened a little. Melissa, fine. Then let's have a plan. Tim, you're leaving on a flight in a week. Jake, you have a choice. Either go look for a job, or go with him, or try to somehow regain your reputation and property. Tim chuckled. In the afternoon, Melissa left with the children to go about her business, leaving the men in the house. Tim suggested, Tim, let's go to the garage. Let's dig through my old engines. Maybe keeping your hands busy with something is already beneficial. Jake agreed. There really was something to look at in the garage. Tim sometimes bought broken motorcycles and repaired them in his free time. Now there were parts from some old Harley and a pair of ATV wheels on the floor. On top are shelves with tools. They spent about 3 hours unscrewing rusty screws and cleaning filters. Jake noticed that the more he immersed himself in the mechanics, the clearer his head became. Thoughts about a ruined life did not go away, but became more orderly. At dinner, this time homemade pizza, they ate as a family. The children had fun and shared stories from school. Melissa said that the neighbor's fence had broken down, and Tim promised to help. The situation seemed almost normal. Jake listened, smiled, even made jokes. But as soon as he remembered that he had no home, no money, no family, his smile faded. He felt that a decisive step was needed. Just which one? The official route's court, lawyers, appeals are most likely useless. That Kyle has connections and experience. But the anger inside grew. When the kids went to bed, Melissa and Tim stayed in the kitchen, while Jake went outside to get some air. Twilight shrouded the surroundings, stars were shining in the sky. He lit a cigarette, looking at the moon as if asking, "What should I do?" The next morning, Jake got up before everyone else. It was about 6. The sky was getting lighter, the birds were chirping in the branches. He washed his face with cold water and ate a couple of pieces of toast with peanut butter. Luckily, Melissa had left breakfast on the table. Then he went out into the yard and lit a cigarette, looking at the awakening of nature. Thoughts of revenge no longer caused fear or rejection. On the contrary, determination throbbed in my chest. Kyle and Ashley took my life, he thought. Maybe it's time to answer them in kind. Just a week ago, it would have seemed. When Tim woke up, he found Jake sitting in the garage, examining tools and parts. Tim rubbed his sleepy eyes and yawned. Tim, why did you get up so early? Jake, I couldn't sleep. I decided to keep my hands busy. Tim, I'll probably leave today. I need to do something. Tim frowned. Tim, where? You said that you have no place to return to. Jake, I just want to go for a ride and think about something. Maybe I'll come back, or maybe I'll find another option. Tim glanced at the tools lying around, a hacksaw, keys of different sizes. Tim, you're not going to do something crazy, are you? Jake grinned, but his gaze became harder. Jake, what if I'm going to? Look, I'm tired of being a victim. They got away with it. I need them to feel the consequences. Tim silently ran his hand through his hair. It was clear that he was not enthusiastic about this idea, but did not show any sharp protest either. He understood Jake. He understood this burning hatred. Tim, okay, I don't know what to say. You are a grown man, but remember that I have a family and I don't want us to be dragged into crime. Jake, I won't drag you along with me. This is my problem. Thank you for your shelter. They hugged for a moment brotherly, silently. Jake picked up one of the keys, examined it, and put it in his pocket. Melissa noticed Jake packing his meager belongings and walked up to him, pursing her lips. Melissa, are you leaving? Jake, yes, you need to decide something with your life. Thank you for shelter, food, everything. Melissa nodded and gently hugged him, as if giving him a farewell. Then she went to the children who were having breakfast. Jake threw his bag onto the passenger seat of the pickup, started the engine, and pulled out of the yard. Tim and Melissa walked out onto the porch, watching him go. Children looked out from behind their parents and waved their arms. Jake waved briefly in response and stepped on the gas, feeling his heart clench with conflicting emotions, gratitude for his friend and his family, and determination to end his humiliation. He drove along the highway, peering at the signs. An hour into the journey, he stopped at a gas station to refill his tank. A warm wind blew across his face as the column measured the growing gallons and dollars. Jake looked at the wallet. There was a little more than 100 left. Over the next few days, Jake rented a cheap room in a boarding house on the other side of town. During the day, he waited in the car, sometimes pretending to be fixing something in a pickup truck or talking on the phone while he watched. He saw them leaving in the morning, apparently Kyle to the office, Ashley to the salon or shopping. They returned together late in the evening, sometimes bringing shopping bags. One day, a Mustang pulled out of the garage briefly. Kyle, apparently, wanted to go for a ride or do some maintenance. Then Jake almost lost his temper. He already had his hand on the door handle, ready to run, scream, demand the car back. But he came to his senses in time. Jake, calmly. No hysterics. I have a plan. Almost there. Every day, he noted down Kyle's routine in a notebook. 8 o'clock leaves, 8:30 office, 18 o'clock returns, and so on. Ashley stayed home or went shopping more often and did not have a strict schedule. But the key was that on Thursdays and Fridays, Kyle leaves town for meetings with clients in neighboring areas, returning only in the evening. That's when the Mustang was in the garage and the BMW was disappearing. So it's easier to get access to the car at night when Kyle and Ashley are home but asleep, Jake figured. Jake hasn't had much to drink this entire week. He wanted to keep his mind cool. In the evenings he smoked, wondering if what he had planned was too harsh. But he took my life, he whispered to himself, and did not flinch. Friday was approaching an opportune moment. The day before, Jake had seen Kyle drive the Mustang into the garage. The BMW will leave with Kyle tomorrow. At night, Kyle and Ashley will most likely go to bed, and the garage will remain locked. But not too securely. I saw that the gates are not particularly massive. There is only one alarm system for the whole house, and there is no separate one in the garage. Kyle and Ashley were going to the office. He wanted to get her a job. Kyle decided to drive the Mustang. Ashley didn't mind. Wind in your hair, nice and fast. Besides her, I also felt like the owner of this car. They left the house around 8. In the glove compartment of the Mustang were sunglasses that Ashley had recently purchased. She smiled at Kyle, looking forward to a pleasant trip. Warm morning, the highway is almost empty. Works. I never thought this Jake wreck could be so cool. Kyle, well, I invested a little. Now this is a wonderful rarity. He stepped on the gas, and the Mustang rushed forward, growling with a powerful engine. Pride echoed in Kyle's chest. Ashley smiled. She loved the speed, the feeling of breaking out of a dull past. At the second 10 miles, the highway stretched out like a straight ribbon. The engine hummed smoothly. The sun was blinding. Kyle increased the speed to 70 to 75 miles per hour. Ashley turned to the window, looking at the passing fields. The first alarming vibration came unnoticed, a slight tremor in the steering wheel. Kyle tensed, thinking it was because of the uneven surface. But the trembling began to intensify. The steering wheel began to twitch, as if it had a life of its own. Kyle, it's strange, there's something wrong with the controls. Late that afternoon, with the sun high, Jake was sitting in Buck's auto. He returned to work, trying to act as normal. The phone rang. The number was not identified, but Jake answered. Female voice. Mr. Reynolds, this is Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. You are listed in documents associated with Mrs. Ashley Reynolds. My throat is dry. My heart trembled. He took a deep breath. Jake. Yes. We're divorced, but did something happen? Officer Rodriguez. I'm sorry to report that Mrs. Reynolds and Mr. Kyle Morgan were involved in a serious accident on the highway this morning. Both died. We need to talk to you because the divorce has not been legally finalized. You are the closest legal contact. Jake. Is there something wrong with the signal, officer? Officer Rodriguez. Can you hear me? Yes, your signature and presence are required to complete the paperwork. We will also conduct an examination of the car. We'll look into it, but apparently this is a technical failure. Jake. Of course. I'm ready to come when you say. The officer gave instructions on how and when to report to the station. She sounded evenly, formally, as if she had made dozens of similar calls. In the end, she wished to hold on. After hanging up, Jake stared out the windshield. The deaths of Kyle and Ashley legally meant that the divorce did not reach the final stage. According to state law, if one spouse dies before all the papers are completed, property acquired during the marriage is returned to the other if there is no will in favor of third parties. Kyle was not officially Ashley's husband, and Ashley did not leave a will. Jake found out about this a week after the funeral, which he did not attend. The lawyer called and explained the legal details. Attorney Martin. Jake, I know it's not easy for you right now, but yes, in essence, everything comes back to you. The house, the bills, even the Mustang. Jake smiled bitterly. Martin. The police closed the case as a malfunction. Kyle recently repaired something there himself and bought new parts. Apparently, he couldn't get it right. Jake thanked Martin and hung up. Putting on his cap, he went to his now again to your home. The first thing Jake did was put everything that could remind him of her into garbage bags. Old clothes, shoes, jewelry. At the same time, he pulled out photos of them together, a wedding album. Into the furnace. All this trash went to the landfill. Then he bought several cans of paint. He chose a cool gray color, calm, neutral. It took a whole week to repair. A month has flown by, the house has been transformed, the car has been restored. One evening, feeling that he had a reason to go for a ride, he started the Mustang. The engine growled, although it still needed some work. The car was not fully painted, but was running. Jake saw his reflection in the dimmed side mirror, a haggard face, stubbornly compressed lips, but there was a spark in his eyes. Deciding to clear his head, he headed to the rusty nail bar. The parking lot near the bar was half empty. The Mustang's engine rumbled loudly as Jake pulled up at the entrance. Several visitors on the street turned around, looking at the retro car. Passerby. Damn, buddy, classic, works well. Jake nodded, turning off the ignition. I felt a little proud. Inside the bar there is twilight, the smell of tobacco and mixed perfumes. Jake ordered himself a light cocktail. He didn't want to get drunk. He sat down at the table, savoring the drink. The evening passed calmly. Tobacco smoke hung over the floor. Some played darts, some played billiards. Soon 2 girls approached the counter, Kate and Sarah. They were happily talking about something with the bartender. Out of the corner of his eye, Jake noticed that one of them, Kate, A blonde with a mischievous smile cast a curious glance in his direction. He smiled faintly in response. As if sensing a signal, she said something to her friend, and both headed towards him. Kate. Hello, your Mustang is beautiful. Just saw him in the parking lot. Sarah. Yes, can we sit down? It's free here. Jake shrugged. Jake. Take a seat. Nice to meet you. I'm Jake. They introduced themselves. Kate and Sarah. We ordered ourselves some cocktails. The conversation flowed easily, as if it were a lively introduction at a friendly party. Jake is unaccustomed to such frivolity. He has lived too long in the shadow of problems and betrayal. But deep down, he felt a pleasant feeling he may be communicating again, smiling. Kate, you're a mechanic, right? Amazing that he restored an old car. Jake, well, she was in a deplorable state. I myself am surprised that she is going again. The night smoothly flowed into the early morning. Kate and Sarah, fueled by cocktails, came up with a crazy idea. Go to the coast and watch the sunrise by the ocean. It was nearby, only 2 hours away. Jake smiled. Why not? He paid for everyone. The trio loaded into the Mustang. The engine roared, as if welcoming a new adventure. It seemed to be a very story night waiting for it. Not all stories have a happy ending somewhere in the depths of his soul. He will bear the cross of his revenge. But in the light of the rising sun, surrounded by new people, Jake felt that it was possible to live on in this world, and sometimes even with a smile.